Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Wilson Weekly. We've got the fantastic Doc Wilson joining us again to give us some market updates. Doc, how's everything going, mate? What do you got for us?
Yeah, pretty good. We were just discussing we're well and truly into summer now, aren't we, of course, and blazing heat and humidity just about everywhere. We had a cool change in Sydney last night, sort of a cool change, but it was pretty challenging, and Melbourne's been challenging. And of course, we always know it's nice and sunny up north. So let's not complain, because it'll be colder sooner rather than later, probably. But it is the beginning of summer, and it is officially the beginning of summer. So happy December and happy summer to everybody as of last Sunday, the 1st of December, pinch and a punch, all that sort of stuff. And it's been a very positive year for the housing market again this year. In fact, when we get the headline results in terms of prices, they're going to be very similar to what they were last year. So very similar result in terms of national prices. Of course, some have performed better than others. Some have been a surprise on the upside. Some have been a bit of a surprise on the downside. But we spoke about that last week, and this week we're going to speak about the rental market. And that's been, some better news. It was really doom and gloom for a long time in regards to what was happening in our rental markets. Rental crisis. Every second headline was telling us that things were very bleak in the rental market, and they were, and they're still not great, but they're looking a little bit better. Now, whether that's because we're getting, a positive rebalance between supply and demand in terms of the number of properties that are becoming available, in other words, more properties, or it's just people are making decisions, hey, it's too expensive to rent, so I've got to make some changes here in terms of my accommodation preferences, and I think it's a little bit of that. But having said that, we are coming to that time of the year, end of November into December particularly, and January, when there is less demand because it is the holiday season. We've got fewer new students coming into the market, of course, and particularly for the unit market in Melbourne and Sydney, new students make up a lot of the demand. And of course, a part of it may be that we've seen some action from the government reducing the number of international students coming in. I'm not sure that's taken effect yet, but you never know. So I've given away the whole theme of today. So we probably get started because I'll probably talk too much. I will talk too much. No probablys about it. And let's have a look at some slide decks before I do that. So My Housing Market is my brand. We do our Wilson Weekly in conjunction with the good folks at Infinity. We've been doing it for a while now. I think we're episode 106 today. Thank you very much for your support. And we're all about bringing you the real-time news in the housing market. That's the agenda. That's the plan here, is to tell you what's happening as soon as we know, as soon as anybody knows what's happening. And all our data points are set to do that. So that's our policy statement, current state, as much as we can get, so you can make informed decisions about the property market. And it's not just, the sort of headline data of prices and rents. We look at all the correlating data sets, as well, obviously, as the economic environment, because that's critical to the housing market, because it is such a significant part of what we do here in Australia, is buying and selling property and living in it, of course, as well. So let's get started. My Housing Market and Infinity with the Wilson Weekly, number 106. Here we go. So it is the week that we've come into the first week of December. I'm getting a bit sick of saying, gee, can you believe how time's flown? But anyway, maybe it's aging me. But we are now heading to the end of the year very quickly, counting down. I guess lots of you out there are celebrating in the usual manner, the work dues, functions, as well as coming up to Christmas. So all the best, everybody, and look after yourselves going forward. So today we are going to speak about the latest. We've come to the end of November. So as usual, hot off the press, we're going to get the latest house price data and unit price data from My Housing Market. And next week, we're going to have a look at the latest rental data, not this week, next week. So that's something to look forward to. And so another, as we said at the beginning of the show, another positive year for the housing market this year. We've only got 1 month to run in terms of the months. Of course, that's December. But we can certainly see what's happening in terms of, just about the whole year. And not a lot of price energy is recorded over December. So what we can see now will be the whole story. But when we get to the end of this year with the webinar, we'll be able to see just how the markets have produced, the big winners and the big losers. Not that there's a lot of them. So this week we're going to look at November house and unit prices. Then we're going to look at the latest October home building approvals, which is important. And then, of course, as usual, finish off the latest auction results. So home prices keep rising. That's a cliche, is it not, in Australia? We've had another positive month for the national house price. That's 22 out of 21 months that we've seen an increase in the national house price. Pretty good stuff. Not a lot of ground there for doomsayers. Been a positive year. Of course, the national house price is a weighted average based on the proportion of the bigger capitals. Of course, the contributions of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane make up most of the energy in that national house price. We measure quarterly data sets, so we take 3 months of data and then we advance it every month. So this month what we've done is we've taken 3 months to November. We've got all the data out of that, the national price and the capital city prices, and then we advance it month by month. So what we're doing here is comparing the November 3-monthly period with the October 3-monthly period. So that gives us a positive feel about the trend, as well as having lots of observations. So we're eliminating volatility in the data set. So it's a perfect result. So again, as I mentioned, house prices continue to rise over November. As I mentioned, again, I'll say it, 22 out of the past 21 months, we've had an increase in the national house price. But we still see the breakaway from the big three. That's Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth, top performers. So Sydney's still recording solid increases in home price. It's interesting in that Sydney market, we've seen a surge in higher priced properties, higher priced areas in Sydney, talking about the upper and lower North Shore, the eastern suburbs, particularly that have, and the northern beaches that are performing quite solidly towards the end of the year and keeping that market ticking over. A little bit different down in Melbourne, which has been an underperformer this year. Slow and steady, I guess we'd call the Melbourne market, looking for that spark to get off the ground. Hasn't happened yet, but certainly it's a market that offers a lot of value. And in contrast to Sydney, it's the higher priced areas in the Melbourne market which are dragging the chain and keeping price growth subdued. Middle and lower price areas in Melbourne are still finding buyers and still recording prices growth, but it is that upper part of the market that is subdued, and that really is a reflection of confidence because they tend to be more, discretionary buyers at that end of the market, which is very vulnerable to sentiment. And I think that's the story of the Melbourne market. Just overall lacks a little bit of confidence, but the underlying drivers remain positive. So, it is an opportunist market in my opinion. So let's have a look at that national data set. There it is, 22 out of 21 months, we've seen a rise. The new national weighted average median sale price, not asking price, for houses is 1,163,921. When we look at the breakdowns, good result in Sydney. As I said, I think this is a little bit of that upper priced market activating at the end of the year in Sydney, and it usually works the other way. But higher priced buyers are happy to get into the market. If you look at our auction result models every week, we'll look at it today as well at the end of the show. You'll see that the highest priced property in Sydney sold last week under the hammer was $26 million. So we do get higher prices than that in Sydney, but sometimes they don't get reported. So it just shows you the energy in the top part of the market when we're getting, $26 million property sales being recorded, and that was in Vaucluse, which is one of those inner eastern suburbs, prestige inner eastern suburbs of Sydney. So up 0.7%, Sydney. Melbourne flat over the month, just up down 0.1%. Brisbane keep on keeping on, up 1%, even though auction clearance rates have been a little lower in Brisbane. We're still seeing prices growth in that Brisbane market, up by 1%. Adelaide also up marginally, 0.4%. Perth, again, the strongest performer of the major capitals, up by 1.3%. Darwin and Canberra also recorded strong results over the month. I think when we look at the full year so far, we can really see the breakaway of those big three, or those three capital cities that have led the charge over the past 12 months. Perth median house prices are now up by 24.4% over the past year. Adelaide up 14.8%, Brisbane up 15.4%. These are spectacular results over the past year. But if you think that's good, have a look what's happened over the past 2 years. Perth's house prices up by 41.7%. Yeah, you're not hearing things. 41.7% increase in the Perth median house price over the past 2 years. Adelaide up 27.4%, and Brisbane house prices up 25.9% over the past 2 years. These are boom time results. B-O-O-M, boom. Very, very strong growth. And, this is the point that it surprised us on the upside just how much energy is continuing in those three capital cities because they are really driving the charge. Sydney up 5.3% over the past year, a little bit down on the same last year, but still keeping its head above water, the Sydney market. And as we've said, Melbourne just really moving sideways at best. So again, it's a story of the big three. And there they are again over November. And that's going to be very close to where they finish the year off in a month's time. Unit price is a little bit more volatile, but we've seen 2 in a row now, 2 months in a row with unit prices increasing. Again, this is a weighted average over the 3 monthly period compared month on month. And as with the weighted averages, it does favour the bigger capital cities, particularly the bigger unit capital cities. Sydney always leads the charge in terms of the number of unit sales. So this does represent, fundamentally what's happening in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane. And when we look at the breakdowns, Sydney up 0.2%, but Brisbane up by 2.2% for unit prices over the month. There's just no slowing down that Brisbane unit market. Adelaide up 0.4%, Perth down 1.1%. And again, when we look at the 1 year results, Brisbane up 26.3% unit prices over the past year. Adelaide up 20%, Perth up 24.5%. And again, when we go back 2 years, these are almost crazy numbers. Look at the Brisbane change in the median unit prices over the past 2 years, 42.4% increase. So if you're a Brisbane unit owner, you'd be feeling pretty good about life given the growth in prices in Brisbane units over the past year. And really not to be sneezed at, Perth units up 38% and Adelaide up 35.6%. So again, some very good news there, particularly for Adelaide, Perth and Brisbane, and particularly in terms of Brisbane, that's really outperforming all the other capitals when we put together both houses and units. And as I said, no sign of slowing down. If you're looking for a copy of the latest My Housing Market November house price report, you can scan that particular QR code and that will take you to a PDF copy of the report. So going forward, the latest economic data we had, of course, we know when we were quasi discussing the rental market earlier, which we will look at in depth next week, that we do have an undersupply problem in this country. It is pushing prices upwards. It is pushing rents upwards. So how's that been going? That's why we look at this very carefully every month to see if we're getting some better news in terms of our supply and demand mismatch. Some sort of better news. We had home building approvals up by 4.6%. That's 2 months in a row we've seen an increase in home building approvals, follows that 3% rise over September. Again, it was units that drove the increase. Units are a volatile measure of building approvals because you can get a big development coming through 1 month and, of course, not replicated the following month, so that we get that sort of up and down movement. But there were some big developments that came through in New South Wales over October, and this has pushed up the overall result nationally. Houses, unusually for houses, have been very consistent over the last 6 months or so, but they were down 5.2%. Let's understand this is seasonally adjusted data, so this can have some reflection on the seasonal factors, but nonetheless, units up again. Units up, but houses down, but still because of the surge in units, we had overall number of homes approved up. And the big performer was New South Wales, as I mentioned, over the month, courtesy of some big unit developments coming through there as approvals, up by 34.8% over the month. We're still, overall, the underlying home building energy still remains depressed. and the quarterly trend is low, but certainly we've seen some light at the end of the tunnel now in terms of heading upwards, and this is coming from houses. But we do need more apartments being approved, and of course, even if we do get them approved, it takes a couple of years for them to get out of the ground and to become places where people can live. So this is the data for houses, units, and the total. Houses down 5.2% over the month, units up 24.8%, overall homes up 4.6%. But when we look at the full year comparisons, the longer periods, we can see units are still dragging the chain, down 6.5% over the first 10 months of this year compared to the same period last year, and over the full year down by 10.3%. But as I said, the light at the end of the tunnel over the trend is houses, up by 8.1% this year so far compared to the same period last year, and up by 6.3% with the year-on-year comparison. So good news there for houses, even though houses did fall away over October. But that's been the revival. That slide hasn't come up, but it is showing us that that national building approvals, the trend is starting to rise on the back of increased houses and over the past month, increased units. And we can see this more clearly now. You can see the darker shade there are units, the trend, and the monthly data. You can see how that bounces up and down from month to month. That's the volatility, as I mentioned, given changes in the in bigger unit approvals on a month-to-month basis. And you can see the trend with the lighter shade in the background there, which is houses, and houses are now tracking ahead of where they were a year ago. In fact, units are tracking where they were ahead of where they were a year ago too. So as I said, trends are still low, but there's no doubt that the overall numbers are still low, but the trend is improving. So fingers crossed this means a better balance between supply and demand. It'll mean better access to the market. But we do have a long way to go to get back to where we were even a few years ago in terms of balance. As usual, Melbourne is the engine room for home approvals over the year to date. Interesting as we continue to note that the number of houses that are that have been approved for building this year so far in Perth is second only to Melbourne. So some very big results there from Perth. We've seen how strong their housing market's growing, and that's obviously acting to significantly create more demand. And when we look at the breakdowns for each of the capital city markets, you can see the black there is units, and they're down significantly in Sydney and Brisbane compared to the same period last year. And given how high the demand is in Brisbane for units, that's not good news. Good news for existing owners, because that'll only put more pressure on prices in that Brisbane market because there's nothing coming through to replicate it. But again, when we look at houses everywhere but Sydney, we've seen houses on the rise this year so far, and they're very big numbers out of Perth. 52% rise in houses over the year to date compared to the same period last year, and 140%. It is a smaller unit market, so but nonetheless a big rise in building approvals for units in Perth. So look, some better news there for houses consistently everywhere except Sydney. So fingers crossed that'll mean some better balance over the medium term, at least in our housing markets. And that shows the long-term trend for capital cities. Just starting to pick up there if we look at the end of the trend, still down by 36.2% compared to the peak of the market back in 2015. But you can see there that annual trend is now starting to rise. But when we break it down between houses and units, houses are the clear drivers of that improvement in overall home approval trend. And you can see in the background there with the full shade, the beige shade there, that units are still trundling along the bottom and are still down 58.3% on the annual trends compared to the previous peak. Big problem is units. That's where we need the solution. We need more units. Good to see more houses coming into the market, or certainly being built, but we need more units because that's what's going to satisfy particularly growing demand for apartment living. So let's finish off with the latest auction results. Not a bad result to end November last week. Clearance rates were steady, and some bigger numbers also came through with auctions. We normally see more supply than demand at the end of the year. A lot of buyers have bought, so demand has been satisfied. but we're still seeing clearance rates holding up, even though they are lower than where they were a month ago or so. So in Sydney, similar numbers last week to the week before, 1,345 auctions. Clearance rate were actually higher in Sydney, 68%, and tracking not too far away from where it was a year ago. So as I said, markets are holding up on a lot of those forward indicators, which particularly, the auction market is. But auctions still well ahead of where they were a year ago in Sydney, but clearance rates higher, so or similar anyway. So that's reflecting the market still finding plenty of appetite for auction sales. Melbourne, big weekend in auctions in Melbourne, well over 1,500 auctions, which was significantly ahead of the weekend before. The week before, clearance rates are actually higher in Melbourne despite that big surge in listings. And again, clearance rates not too far away from where they were a year ago in Melbourne, but a big change in the number of auctions. And that's what we've seen really this year, most of the year, a surge in seller activity or listings activity as confidence grew in the market. Brisbane's clearance rates have really tracked downwards over the past month or two. But as we've seen from prices growth, the Brisbane market has a different attitude towards auctions. So we're still seeing prices growth there, even though clearance rates are lower. Adelaide's down now from its 70, 80% results we were used to week after week in Adelaide. A more rational, I guess, market, more balanced market in Adelaide, but it is part of that end of the year shakeout in clearance rates. And Adelaide up after a weaker weekend the week before. A week a week. Is that not nonsensical? Anyway, so, but higher listings and a higher clearance rate. So we can see that trend easing as the year progressed. We see that every year, no exception this year. Sydney in the mid to high 60s after being in the mid 70s. Melbourne's really held its own for most of the year in those mid 60s. We need to see, if you're a buyer anyway or a seller, more competition for property for higher prices, heading up more towards the 70% mark. But we'll wait and see what happens next year in Melbourne. Again, Brisbane just eased a bit as similar results, seasonal results compared to the other capitals. But as we've mentioned, that Brisbane housing market is still going quite strong. Adelaide really has fallen away over the last 2 months, particularly given those quite remarkable results we saw consistently in Adelaide over the beginning of this year and, well, really up until the beginning of spring and last year. And Canberra, sort of steady, but again, similar to Melbourne, we've been waiting for a revival there. If you're looking for those weekend auction clearance rates, you'll see them on my LinkedIn site, Doc Andrew Wilson at LinkedIn. Every Saturday night, the weekly results at around about 6 o'clock to 6:30. And then you can get the full national report every Sunday on my LinkedIn site, and that includes the regional breakdowns for Sydney and Melbourne and the top 10 sales out of each capital cities under the hammer. There is a QR code for the latest national auction market report. You can get a scan of that, which will take you to a PDF copy of the latest data, which, as I said, includes a lot of price data in real time. So as we finish off, as usual, let's have a look at the Infinity My Housing Market Suburb Data app. This is a great little tool to help you with your decision making. It provides real-time asking and rental prices, asking rents and asking prices for every suburb in Australia that has data. It's updated quite regularly. You can get that, scan that QR code for a copy. You have to get an access code through Infinity. It is password protected, but it's well worth having. Let's have a look at what it offers. So this is a screenshot. You can filter for price or rent. We've filtered here for price. You can filter for outside capital city region or the capital city region. We've filtered here for the Sydney capital city region. We've looked at Blacktown, which is a large suburb in Sydney, but you can look at every suburb in New South Wales, well, in Sydney. You can filter for house unit or townhouse. We've filtered there for house. You can also filter for the number of bedrooms. So quite a comprehensive data set available there. And the results there, not just the median asking price, but also the high and the low. So it gives you a range of prices there. As I said, every suburb in Australia that has data will provide you with this data set. It tells you what the market's thinking right here and right now in terms of prices. It also tells you the number of listings that are available. So it shows you the competition out there. So a great little tool for buyers and sellers. And it is part of that Infinity tool set. So get onto Infinity for that password, and exactly the same on offer for the rental market. and you can see we've filtered it for the same there, and that's the median rent, the median asking rent, the high asking rent, and the low asking rent. And there's just 2 properties for sale, 5 bedrooms, for rent in Blacktown at the moment. So we've also added some extra data there for investors on our app, where we will filter for those same regional areas, the top 10 yields. So it shows return on your investment in terms of the top 10 yields. So this can help decision making for investors. It also shows you the number of properties that are for sale and for rent for each of those suburbs. And it also gives you the vacancy rate. Wow, this is incredible. And if you notice, there's hot links there on those suburbs. You can actually click onto that and it'll take you to the actual suburb where it is, so you can figure out where these places are. So how good is that, that we're offering now through Infinity? Great little tool set. So get hold of that one. Next week, we will have November house and unit rents, also the October retail sales, and the latest auction results as the market completely runs out of steam, because we only have 2 weekends left. If you've missed the report, there is a download of the report there, which you can get hold of. So until next week, I bid you all a fond adieu. Enjoy all the lovely summer weather, and enjoy all the holiday festivities. And we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Doc. Appreciate that, mate. I'm just looking forward to seeing you in your 90s outfit on Friday, mate.
Oh, decisions.
Have you got your bandanas and all that sorted?
No, I've got something, but I'm not great on the fancy dress. But you never know. This might be an exception, this one. So we'll see. But I am looking forward to what my partner is wearing. I think that will be quite spectacular, but we'll see.
Happy days, mate. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it.
And,
We'll see you next week, mate.